This is Michael Proctor, and I welcome Mr. Jeff Turner onto Real Wealth Podcast, sponsored by Leading Edge Financial Planning. Now, Mr. Turner was the CEO of Spirit AeroSystems when it was launched back in, what year was that?
2005.
2005, and you were the first CEO for quite some time and led Spirit AeroSystems to success in many different ways and rode some ups and downs and have an immense amount of business experience from your years there and back from when it was Boeing.
Yeah, that's right. I worked for Boeing for 31 years and then for Spirit for 8.5, 31 plus and 8 plus, and total of almost 40 years in the business. So yeah, I guess you can call that experience.
Yeah, I would say that is experience. In fact, you're a Wichita native. You're a North High grad.
Yeah.
And Wichita State grad.
Yes.
And yeah, I've admired your work and how you've poured back into the community after your years at Spirit AeroSystems. You've got several businesses that you've been a part of selecting, identifying, and growing talent. A couple of them would be Moment. Miguel Johns has been on with us. Zip Sip.
Right. Lacey.
With Lacey, thank you. In fact, we had a great time at a K-State tailgate about a month ago, I think.
Oh, did you? Yeah.
Yeah, out pushing the product, getting it out there. You got you're involved with a broker-dealer startup here in town, right?
I don't think a broker-dealer.
Okay.
No, that's one of the few that I'm not. I'm involved with a fellow that does some insurance work, but so far I've kind of stayed out of the
investment side.
Although I'm involved with some software, guys are working some software for financial planning.
Right, David Thorne in fact, we are benefiting from their work.
Are you? Good.
We'll be rolling out our own app for our firm.
Right.
Here, probably in the next month or two. Hopefully, it's a Christmas present to our clients.
There you go. David and Joe Whitty have been supporting them for several years now. So, yeah, it's real interesting. When I did retire from Spirit AeroSystems, it's a major shift in your life, and I was trying to figure out what to do. A lot of people were asking me to get involved in different things, boards and teaching or ministry, any number of things. And I took a little bit of time and thought through what I wanted to do. And something I'd always wanted to do is support. I want to give back to the community and help people because I had a ton of help through my career. I kind of settled on this idea of working with the entrepreneurial community in Wichita. And I've been doing that now for, I don't know, 7, 8 years, and keep hoping I'll make some money back. So I want to make some money on it so I can keep feeding my habit. But it's a challenging business. Anytime you start something, you take a lot of risk, and these are really, really energizing people to be around and watch them go through the ups and downs of entrepreneurship is pretty interesting.
Incredibly so. Yeah.
Well, you've been an entrepreneur and started your own firm, and that's not easy.
It's not super easy, but it is worthwhile when you know the purpose behind what you're doing it and why you're doing it, and get to see the impact that you can make in people's lives. So
no guarantees though when you start something. You do take risks that a lot of people don't want to take.
Yeah.
And sometimes it works, and sometimes it doesn't. And it's kind of like any sport, sometimes you win, sometimes you don't.
Mm-hmm.
You can get breaks that help you, and you get breaks that don't help you. That's the reality of being an entrepreneur.
Certainly. And I remember when you took some time to invest your time with me a couple of years ago, one of the comments you made was wealth is created in concentration and protected in diversification. So,
yeah, it's. I think that's not an absolute factual statement for everybody, but my experience is that's the way it happens. You make wealth with a concentrated risk,
mm-hmm.
and then once people have wealth, they tend to protect it. With firms that are good at trying to beat the market, but basically over time they match the market.
Yeah. Well, and for most people, they're not going to go out and start a business to do that, nor was that really the purpose of why I started doing this. I did it because it wasn't really available from what I could find.
Yeah.
And it gave me an opportunity to create a culture and an environment in which to serve our clients that I wanted to create. Yeah, for most people, putting money away, being disciplined financially is really all they need to do to meet their needs. And they've been blessed abundantly in a way that if they will simply do those things, they'll be just fine.
What was that I heard one time, Mike? I'm sure you know this, but like the population is a third. A third lives on what they have and don't save anything, and a third live below their means and are therefore going into debt all the time, deeper and deeper into debt, and a third save for the future. I'm thankful my parents, Rhonda's parents, taught us to be frugal,
mm-hmm.
and to save. And frankly, it was that frugality that allowed me to invest in Spirit when we built Spirit. So it's really frugality, that either that or generational wealth that is the basis for building value.
Yeah.
It's not there's not very many that are rock stars or $1 million athletes or something that just even they don't fall into money. They rock stars probably been practicing the guitar since they were 8 years old.
Mm-hmm.
But the point is, it's frugality and focus and hard work that bring value.
Absolutely.
Sometimes doesn't always bring value. You can do all those things and be quote unquote unsuccessful in business. There's no guarantees, and that's what makes it exciting in many ways.
Yeah, there's no guarantees, and hopefully you can manage the risk well enough, and hopefully you've got good mentors around you that can understand if things are starting to go sideways so you can either make a correction or make some important decisions.
Well, and you'll appreciate this. When we were moving from Boeing to Spirit here, and I needed some resources to make my investment into Spirit, my financial advisor tried to talk me out of it. And in fact, he did talk me into kind of modulating what I was going to do. So I invested a little bit less, not much, but a little bit less than I had planned to, based on his advice that I not, roll the dice and push all the chips on the table, if you will. And in hindsight, I should have pushed all my chips plus yours onto the table, but it was fine.
Yeah.
So I guess I learned a little bit of a lesson in that, which is balance. You don't push all the chips on the table all the time. That's foolhardy.
Yeah.
You do balance, and you take risk with what you can afford to lose.
Right.
In a way.
Absolutely. And that goes back to, I guess I'm not sure what the context of the other folks you're talking about, but your ability to accept risk is different than many, and you can afford risk in ways other people can't. And that's what puts you in a unique position to invest in this community in the ways that you have.
Well, and Mike, the other thing, I've thought a lot about the risk profile in my life, and I've always been, in one way or another, a little bit of a risk taker, but I was not a financial risk taker in my life. When I felt very strongly the responsibility of a family to raise. Rhonda chose to be a stay-at-home mom, to work with our children when they were young. And so the money that I could bring home from my job was what sustained our family. And so I wasn't a financial risk taker at that point in my life. When the kids got out of school, we got them through college. Rhonda went back to college, got a master's degree after our kids left home. She's a marriage and family counselor now. And so we were in a different place financially. So the risk wasn't that I was not just risking myself, I was risking the whole family.
Sure.
After that, it was like, okay, I can risk now because, Rhonda can help, and it's not as it's not as catastrophic if the risk doesn't pay out. So I've thought about that. It's a very different profile of earlier in life and then through time. So it always amazes me when I run into an entrepreneur, who's 25 years old and he's newly married and his wife's pregnant and he's risking everything on a business, and that's a different risk profile than I ever did. And I'm not saying it's right or wrong, but I didn't have that much risk tolerance. But I also notice a lot of times today, families or couples are dual income couples, and so one of the two will do the risky venture, and the other will be the stable.
Right.
That tends to work.
Yeah, or some combo there. Yeah, teamwork makes the dream work, right?
Yeah, that's what they say.
That's what they say. In our view, when we're helping people do lifestyle financial planning, one of the things we keep in mind is that we've got from here until then, time-wise, and we don't know when then is going to be. So we do focus on living the best life possible with the time that we have while we're here, and in having the most impact and just making the most of what we've been given. So now that you're in retirement, quote unquote, I mean, I know you keep a pretty busy schedule, and a little surprised you didn't bring your puppy today.
Yeah, she would have interrupted the podcast.
Yeah.
So I took her hunting a couple of days ago, and
nice.
So she's still recovering.
Oh, nice. But yeah, so how are you living the best life possible today? What's that mean for you, where you're getting joy out of what you do, and it's impacting you on a deep level to make the most of what you got left?
Well, I think a couple thoughts pop into my head, Mike, and the first one is that joy is a result that comes from other objectives. If joy is the objective, you will never achieve it.
I love that.
People, I mean, we've all heard it. We probably said it sometimes. But you hear people say, I just want to be happy. Okay? And my view is, if you want to be happy, then make somebody else happy. Give, serve. And I say this out of a philosophical base because I'm not that good at it. I'm fundamentally a selfish person. I think most of us are. And I'm after what gives me pleasure, joy, whatever. And it's, I mean, all you got to do is look at the trail of tears that goes with people that you would consider successful. And I learned really, really early in my life, in my management career at Boeing, I'd watch people as they retired. And what I noticed is the higher level they were in management, the more unhappy they tended to be when they retired. So the more they made, the more fame, if you will, in the company, the more they just were, they didn't want to retire, or they had to retire, or whatever, and they just weren't as happy. The happiest people were like the highest level of achievement of the technical or the trade people. So the master engineer, or the master builder, or the master tool maker, they were the ones that were the happiest. They'd kind of found themselves. They knew they weren't going to be the CEO of the company. They didn't want to manage other people, right? They would lead other people, right? But they wouldn't be in charge of them. And they built things. They were the experts in their field. And those tended to be the people. They tended to have good families, good family life. And I got to thinking about that, and I thought, you know what? They have balance. They have balance. And there are a couple of them. One of them worked for me, and when I was a pretty new supervisor, and actually watching him with his kids became the model for me of what I wanted with my kids in life. I didn't want, quote unquote, success in business to get in the way of success in fatherhood. And Bruce was his name, and Bruce was a wonderful man. Everybody loved working with Bruce, and Bruce was one of the happiest guys in the world when he retired. Didn't have a ton of money, but he planned well, lived within his means, saved money, and then he and Virginia went and had a wonderful retirement. Traveled some, spent a lot of time with their grandkids, had their house paid off, just lived the American dream, served in his church. You think about that, it's like the balance. Balance is what gives you joy.
Right.
Right? Joy doesn't give you joy. It's like taking your kids to amusement park and giving them everything they want. When you're done giving them everything they want, they're miserable.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, joy is a fruit.
Yeah.
It's a byproduct. It's got inputs and it doesn't just happen.
Right. It's a result. It's not the objective. It's the result.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you talked about Bruce mentoring you. I was going to ask you, we don't get where we get by ourselves. And I think you said it earlier too.
Right. I had a lot of help.
Yeah. Who?
It's really interesting. Mentors. I've just had a lot of people who helped me, and I didn't have you hear about Tuesdays with Maury. I don't know if that's even a book that people remember, but probably giving me I've never heard of that book. Look. But it's not somebody there's nobody that I just regularly spent time with throughout my whole career. But I tried really hard to make every supervisor I ever had, every boss I ever had, a mentor and a sponsor. I think probably the biggest influential mentor in my business life was King Solomon and the Proverbs. I think, the Proverbs are just chock full of the wisdom of God. And when you make Scripture like that, which is eminently practical, you make that the foundation of your thought process and hopefully your life. I think it's a inflowing of God's wisdom, which is, pretty good mentor base. Pretty good. It's really good.
It's up there, yeah.
But I had other people from time to time. A guy named Ernie Monk was a wonderful mentor to me real early in my career. And there were others. I had heroes that I really looked up to. One of my regrets in life, I don't have very many regrets, but I was the CEO of Spirit, and one of my heroes is Nelson Mandela. And I used to say, man, I wish I could just sit down and talk to Nelson Mandela. And, I think as the CEO of Spirit AeroSystems, I probably could have called him and gotten some time with him and gone and sat down with him. But I thought, who am I to go ask Nelson Mandela for some time? But I bet he would have given it to me. Because he at that time had retired and people go, well, Jeff, I'd like to talk to you because I think you could help me. And then people are afraid to because they think I'm too busy for it. And, sometimes, you and I, Mike, it took us, 6 weeks or so, or maybe more, to find the time that worked for both of us. So it does sometimes take some time. But the older you get, the more honoring it is when somebody asks you for advice or wants to sit down and talk to you. It's really fascinating. If I come to you, Mike, and I say, Mike, I can help you, how do you react? Like, whoa, who is this guy that? But if I come to you and I say, hey, Mike, I need some help, and I think you can help me with it. How's that make you feel? Man, this guy thinks I'm helpful. He thinks I'm smart. And so you think about it that way.
Yeah.
If you go ask somebody for some advice or to spend some time with them or to mentor them, you're actually honoring them. You're actually saying to them, hey, I think I can learn alongside you. And so it's a positive thing. And I would encourage people not to shy away from doing that, asking for some time and talking about things.
What comes to mind is the value that God says He's put in each and every one of us, and that act of asking for help or asking for wisdom or asking for time is that honoring act that highlights that truth.
And you know what? If you ask somebody and they won't give you the time of day, they're the wrong one. They're the wrong one to talk to.
Absolutely.
Because either they're in the wrong place, and we're human beings, and there are days when we are just warm and fuzzy and friendly and loving and kind and all those things, and there are days when we are kind of snarky and
human
and self-centered, and that's kind of the fascinating thing about working with people is they don't show up the same every day. They don't. They come in different because they're whatever's going on in their life.
That's right.
And it makes it fascinating. God must have a great sense of humor. In human terms. He's everything, but
he created humor.
Yeah, he did. He had to. He created everything.
Mm-hmm. Speaking of funny things, what have been maybe some great learning points over the years that created either a business pivot for you or a realization where you shifted your philosophy?
Oh, man. Well, really, a couple things, 2 or 3 things popped to mind. The first one is, I think, when I realized that that I had not that I had a voice, but that I had influence, really strong influence, if I would exert it. I was a leader of a software project at Boeing, and we were getting to the point in the program in the process where we had to stop changing specifications, and we couldn't meet the schedule to get it done. And we had a customer, internal customer, who just would not stop changing the specifications. He just tweaking them all day, every day. And he was quite a bit higher level manager than me. But I remember distinctly, we were in a meeting, and I said, the changes must stop. And this guy looked at me, and he says who? And I said, well, they got to stop or we're not going to hit the schedule. He said, who says they have to stop? And I finally just stood up big and tall and looked him in the eye, and I said, I say they have to stop. I'm the program manager of this project. And if you don't stop the changes, I will notify all of our sponsors that we're going to be late. So I say they have to stop. And they stopped. And it amazed me. I'm going, whoa, I had no idea that I had that kind of influence. So that was one of them. So I went, I think it's important for any leader to underuse their power. You don't have to tell people. If you're the leader, you don't have to tell people, I'm the leader. So because I'm the leader, we're going to do this. You just have to say, I think we need to do this. And people appreciate that. Nobody appreciates power being pushed on them. But there are times, if you're the leader, you got to stand up and exercise the power that you have as the leader, or things aren't going to get done. So that was one of them. Another time was I had gotten a new job assignment, and the job assignment was less. I'd been a director for 5 years, and been on the incentive payroll at Boeing, and thought my career was going pretty well. And they did a big reorganization, and I became the tooling manager. Manager's a lower level title than a director. And several of my peers who I was working with and competing with for promotions, they got bigger director titles. And so I felt really terrible about it. I just felt like, I don't know what I did wrong, and so. And not only that, the job location was clear down at the end of the facility. It wasn't just down at the end of the hall. It was down at the end of the facility. I moved clear out of the admin building into the tooling building. And I was depressed about it. Felt terrible. But the scripture kept coming through my head. Steps of a righteous man are ordered of the Lord.
Yeah.
I'm righteous not because of my righteousness, but because of His righteousness and His gift of salvation to me. And so therefore, by His righteousness, I'm a righteous man. And so I claimed that verse and didn't help at all for a few days. But I was sitting in my office one day, and I just thought, you know what? God knows where you are. He hasn't lost you. And if you're a righteous man, your steps are being ordered of him. So he must want you here for some reason. And I just thought, you know what? If I never get another job at Boeing, never get promoted again, never go anywhere, I'm going to do the tooling manager's job with gusto and with joy. And you know what? To this day, including CEO, is my favorite job ever. It's a great job. Nice. Great people, great projects to work on, awesome technical skills in that particular area. And I love it. I loved it. And it was the basis by which I learned enough to be in charge of the factory. Had I not had that job, I'd never learned enough about the real way things work to actually help run the factory. So that was really a turning point. Major shift in the way that I thought about things. And of course, it's like ebb and flow. You know, sometimes you're really close and in tune to God, and you're submissive to His will, and you praise and thank Him for everything. And other times you're more selfish, and you think you're in control. And I've noticed that the joy meter is directly inversely proportional to that. The more you give away of your will, submit yourself to God, the more the joy meter goes up. You know, may not be easy, may not be pleasurable, but it's joyful. The more you take it upon yourself, the more you try to be in charge, the more you try to bring pleasure to yourself in whatever form you choose to try to bring it, the lower the joy meter goes. And I think that's a fundamental truism. At least it has been in my life. Then the third point of the major turning point in learning the business was when we became Spirit AeroSystems. Up to that point, I'd always worked inside a big company, inside a big bureaucracy. And it became obvious to me that if the plant and the people were going to flourish, they were going to have to do so outside of Boeing. Much bigger market, much greater opportunities for the company. And so 2001, we set about a process that ended up, I think I told you 2005, but I think it was in 2004. And I think we went public in 2005, but I don't remember. Maybe it's 2005, somewhere in there. I think 2004 we inked the deal that became Spirit, and I think in June of 2005 is when it actually became Spirit. But that was a big turning point. I mean, I literally went from, running a division inside a great big company to being an independent company. The day we became Spirit, we had 14 days of cash.
Wow.
Yeah. And so I went from 31 years of never one day in 31 years worrying about cash to worrying about cash every single day. And it was a fascinating process, fascinating ride, a tremendous learning experience. Met some really neat people and had some good partners and it worked out. It worked out pretty well.
There was one time, I guess when you came and spoke to our group of mastermind group of some entrepreneurs. Okay. Remember that? And I don't know how much maybe you want to go in on this, but there was a story you told where you had to fly out and go take a stand for Spirit, or else it was going to have some pretty massive ramifications. But as you were talking about standing up to that other software manager that was making all those changes, It's like, God gives us these learning points that we don't even understand the level of impact it's going to have when we learn it for later on.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I think I'm not the particular instance that's isn't coming to mind. There was a time right in the middle of the process where the Onyx team, some things had happened. I think the labor unions had voted down the contract, and they were going to throw in the towel. They were going to say, "Yeah, this isn't going to work," because one of their tenets was, "We're not going to go do this without a labor contract." And the news of that came across while we were flying to New York. And I'm whistling a tune and walking into the office, and it's like somebody died. I look around, and they meet me, and they said, "Hey, this thing's going up in smoke," and because the labor unions turned it down. And I just remember thinking about it for a second, and I said, "Well, why do you think that's so? Why do you think it's going up in smoke?" "Well, we can't do this without the labor unions." And I said, "No, you can't. But you have to understand, their choice was keep things just exactly like they are today, or go do something we don't understand and know the impact of." That's the choice. Which choice do you think they're going to make? That's the choice they're going to make. We presented the question to them in the wrong way. And I said, "You guys, listen, just keep your eye on the prize. Don't let this other stuff distract us. We're going to get there." Probably said that with more conviction than I actually had, but it.
But there's humility in that response.
Just a calmness in the storm. Because a lot of times the storms, and especially in business, they're manufactured. I mean, some of them are real. But I mean, if I panicked every time somebody came into my office with their hair on fire, or used the term "it's a disaster," or I mean, I'd died of a heart attack a long, long time ago. It's just things are not as. One of my beliefs is that things are never as bad as you think they are when you think they're really bad, and they're never as good as you think they are when you think they're really good. The reality is somewhere in between. So you don't panic when you think things are really bad, and you don't get euphoric when you think things are really good. You try to modulate between those. But that was a situation and that was a turning point for sure. Because I think if Ron Brunton who was my chief operating officer at the time, if he and I hadn't been there at the right time, and that was nothing that we did, we just happened to be going there, we wouldn't have been able to calm him down. I don't think we could have calmed him down over the phone. But we were there, and we were able to calm him down. And then we had to calm down the customer in Seattle, the Boeing customer, because they were worried that if we did this deal and shut down the plant, and that it wouldn't be too good for them. And so we just had to, and I was the focal point in all that. I had to talk the Onyx people into staying in the deal. I had to talk the Boeing people into not saying this. We got to stop this because the risk is too high. I remember about that time. I remember getting up one morning and looking in the mirror and going, "What are you doing? Are you out of your mind?" Because I was 54 years old, and when you're 55, you're vested, man. You can retire. I'm 54, and I'm just going, "Are you crazy?" I mean, you're like putting all the chips on the table, changing your lifestyle, taking these people down a path that you don't know. And I went, I'm not crazy. It's a calculated risk, and we're going to take it. Because I couldn't stand the idea that the plant would devalue over time. And that's really kind of where it was headed. So, he sucked it up and went and did it, and it worked out.
How many jobs were on the line at that point?
Well, there were about, at the time, there were about 10,000, because the cycle had gone down. There were about 10,000. It had been as high as, the plant here in Wichita had been as high as 33,000. And then it had gone down, come back up to around 20, gone down, come back up to about 17 or 18, gone back down. So it was about 10, 13 if you counted the military side. But I was just responsible for the commercial side. And, part of that is the production of the plant is more than it's ever been. But with automation and newer designs and more machine work, the labor hours per airplane product output is quite a bit lower. So you don't need as many laborers. When it was 33,000 employees, I mean, there would be row after row after row of small machines and people like drill presses just pulling the levers and drilling holes in sheets of aluminum. And, of course, all that's done by machine now.
Probably faster and more accurate.
Right.
Yeah.
It is.
And thankfully, those other folks have been able to do other things in the community these days and diversify our economy.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. I heard, I don't remember exactly, but it was like a machinist. They were interviewing a machinist about what his biggest concern for the future was. And he said, there's no one to take my job. And people said, well, that's weird. Most people don't think that way. What do you mean? He said, well, I've got 2 kids. And I've worked this job in aerospace so that my kids could go to college. My kids have both gone to college and they're now professionals. And there's nobody in my family to take this job.
Wow.
And so I think if we needed 33,000 laborers today to run the factory, there's no way we could find them.
Yeah, the trades have
there's no way
really
we could
shrunk
find
down.
them.
Yeah.
And so you think it's just kind of a natural progression of design and capability, and so the machinist of yesterday was a craftsman in a different way than the machinist of today.
Right.
The machinist of today also has computer skills and the ability to take a 3-dimensional digital data set and operate the machine so it turns out a high-quality part, which is different than the one who turned the knobs and machined with dexterity. The machinists of today machine with computer skills.
Yeah.
Different skill set.
It is interesting. Wow. What's an insight that you've got today that you wish you could have latched on 41 plus years ago or 50 years ago?
Actually, I can't think of any, because when I was 30, I went through a physical issue and had to have surgery. It laid me up for 2 weeks, and I thought a lot about life in those 2 weeks, just laying there. One of the things I did is I set my priorities for life when I was 30. There were 5 of them. I think I can remember all 5 of them. But the first one was and I said it like this: when I'm 65, I want.
Okay.
and I wrote them down. The first thing I said is, I want to still have my faith. I'd watch people fluctuate in their faith over the years, especially in business. They thought they had to make a choice between faith and business. I think that's a lie. You don't have to. Just read Proverbs. Proverbs is full of righteous business concepts. The second was, I still wanted to be married to Rhonda. Seen a lot of people go through life, be successful, and lose their marriages. The third thing is, I wanted to know and be intimate with my kids. I didn't want to show up at the end of my career when I was ready to be a dad and a grandpa, and my kids had long since moved on.
Yeah.
Didn't want that to happen. The fourth thing is, I said, this is the only one of the four I didn't achieve. I said, in my life, in the last 5 years, I want my final promotion to come in 5 years before I retired. And that was the idea of continuing to grow and learn. And my final promotion came 8 years before, not 5. And then the last one was, I said, when I get to the end of my life, I don't want to look back with major regrets. I have some small regrets. I wish I'd have done this. I wish I'd have done that. So in answer to your question, I think there's nothing I sit here and say, I wish, it's a big regret. I wish I'd done this different. But I really do think, now looking back, I would have paid a whole lot more attention to those 5 priorities. Deliberately, intentionally, all the time. Because I would continually get out of balance. And then I'd have to get back in balance. Mm-hmm. And I think my learning would be, I think there was a period of time in my life where I kind of put my spiritual growth on the shelf. I mean, I still believed, I still went to church, I still did all that, but I kind of thought, well, if you'd asked me, I'd have passed the church quiz, right? As to what's more important. But if you'd looked at the time allocation in my life, you would have seen that there was a period of time, and several periods of time, where I just sort of didn't put as much emphasis on the spiritual side. And I would have liked to have put more, looking back, I'd have put more spiritual emphasis in my life earlier. And I think it would have been more joyous if I'd have done that. Yeah. But you know that is one thing. I've never been somebody who sat around and went, "Oh my gosh, I wish I had," because it's like that is a total waste of time.
Yeah.
You can say to somebody younger than you, "I'd suggest you do this."
Yeah.
But you can't say to yourself, I mean, it's a total waste to say, "I wish I had."
Oh, cool. Yeah. You can't go back and relive your life.
So you just say, I am where I am. I can only go forward from where I am. Mm-hmm. But if I'm talking to you, I'd say don't neglect the discipline. And I tell this to a lot of the entrepreneurs I work with. I believe firmly that we are body, soul, mind, and spirit. And take care of all 4 of them, right? And there was a time when I was CEO running all over the country and all over the world, really doing all kinds of things that I didn't take as good a care of myself physically as I should have, nor spiritually. Because it's just, if you let it, the demand, I don't care what you do, the demand of your job, the demand of your family, the demand of your church, the demand of your civic club, they all want 100%. And only you can modulate that and keep the balance. And balance is never perfect, right?
Sure.
It's always moving around the balance point, and you got to counterbalance in order to keep it there. And it will swing back. If you get it out of balance too far, it will swing back like a pendulum. But then it goes past the other way, and things are a mess. But that's really what I'd say is I think keeping things in balance. And the things that tend to get out of balance are the spiritual, the time with your family, those things that don't clamor for your attention.
Right.
And pretty important to think about balance and stay in balance.
Yeah. Good word. So I didn't know you while you were the CEO of Spirit, but I do know the investments you make into those that you work with now, in the entrepreneur side and those that you get time with. Unfortunately, sometimes the church gets a bad rap on, being a judgmental or kind of a nudge or whatever, but I see the ways that you minister in very practical benefit to the community and those around you. What encouragement might you give to other churchgoers on how they can carry out their ministry in an encouraging way? And maybe if you have a comment on what do you think is at the center of how you've gone about that?
Well, I think for me, I lived with a pretty big conflict in my life because I somewhere along the way picked up the idea that if I was going to be a Christian, it would be at the expense of being a business person, and if I was a business person, it would be at the expense of being a Christian.
Okay.
And I think that's absolutely not a truism. I think that's absolutely a lie from the pit of hell to keep people who are designed by God to be in business from being fulfilled in business and to think somehow they're less.
Yeah.
And so it was a pivotal point in my life. I ran across went to a men's retreat and ran across a book called Your Work Matters to God. And man, oh man, that just turned me around, and it so freed me because I realized I didn't have to think about being a different person when I was being a dad than I was when I was being an executive, than when I was being a Sunday school teacher or in church. Or it was just freeing to be me.
Yeah.
And so I would just encourage people to. If you're trying to be a Christian and you're trying to be a civic person, active in your civic responsibilities or duties or desires, and you're in a church or a small group or whatever, and you find yourself being different. If you're different with your hunting buddies than you are with your Sunday school class, something's wrong. It's just going to put stress in your life, right? Because now you got to kind of think, well, you got to be on guard.
Yeah, you got to silo everything and
I
keep
just
it that
went,
way.
Yep. And there was a point in my life, I was in my 30s, and I just went, you know what? This isn't worth it. It ain't working. And once I kind of got all the wires straightened up again, I was much more just who I was. Quit trying to be what everybody else wanted me to be when they wanted me to be it. And it got much less stressful to just be me. And that's I know that sounds a little bit. Everybody goes, oh yeah, of course, just I want to be me. But you got to realize that being yourself is a selfish, self-centered, sinful person. So, and that's not good, right? So the real issue is being yourself, being authentic in your walk with Christ and your desire to grow in His likeness. Okay? Not putting on masks so that people will think you're righteous when you're at church, and taking that mask off and, being a hellion or whatever it is when you're with your buddies on a fishing trip or a hunting trip, right? Now you might, there are some things you probably don't say in church that you say on a hunting trip, but
Sure.
But that's not being different. That's not being somebody different. And I think that's really important that I would say to people. If your church relationships are not encouraging you to be authentic in church, out of church. See, when I was a kid growing up, you had to be righteous in the church. So there's all this self-righteousness, all this phony holiness, right?
And everybody sees right through it too. I mean, it's...
Yeah, that's right. And, when we all realize, the minister through the person who's never been to church before, that we are all desperately, Scripture says our heart is desperately wicked. We are desperately in need of a Savior, all of us, whether we're the minister presenting the lesson or the gospel or the sermon for the day, or we're the person who has just come in that feels the most despicable. And in fact, Jesus was drawn, I think, to the people who were humble and realized how bad they needed a Savior. He wasn't very drawn to the religious leaders. That was his major conflict point. But I think that's the most important thing about church. And ministers are, for goodness sakes, they're human. They're human. And they make all kinds of mistakes.
Yeah.
Now, I've been real involved with something called the Global Leadership Network.
Right, yeah.
Global Leadership Summit, which actually came into being because a church in Chicago looked at it and said, you know what? Our ministers aren't being trained to be leaders. And so they created this process to help ministers become good leaders. And it has evolved to where it's a lot of business people go to it to become better leaders.
Absolutely.
And so, I think a lot of ministers need grace. They really do. I have ministers in my family, and they need grace, just like the non-ministers in my life need grace. I need grace. Mm-hmm. We all need grace. So I don't know if that answered your question or not.
No, that's great.
I think it's really important.
Yeah. Yeah, and when you're talking about when you were a kid going to church and you were experiencing this expectation of righteousness, that's rooted in performance. That's not rooted in grace.
Well, I think it's rooted in a misunderstanding of grace. And this is something I've learned over time. Grace is God's gift to us. And the idea of salvation, of course, is that we're separated from God. In fact, ultimately, if you think about it, we want to be God in our lives. I don't want to be God in your life, but I want to be God in my life, which means I want to be in charge of it. I want to decide. I want to be, because as perverse as this is, I think that the choices I would make me happier than the choices God would make for me, which is insane, right?
A little backwards.
But that's exactly how we operate.
Mm-hmm.
And so it takes discipline of surrender to God in order to follow Him more faithfully. And we never achieve till we get to heaven, right? Well, grace in church, when I was a kid, grace was presented like this. You're a sinner, you're away from God, come to Jesus, get saved, and you're now in grace, not out of grace.
Right.
But it was presented as a one-time thing.
Yeah.
And so you were bad, you accept Christ, now you're good.
Now you're good. You got to live up to it.
But I was bad, I accepted Christ, I'm still bad.
Mm-hmm.
And so, but I have to act good because everybody knows that I accepted Christ. Therefore, I have to be good because otherwise something's wrong with Christ. And that can't be, right? And so I got to act like I'm better than I really am. And inside, I'm still rotten, right? So grace is not about a one time. It's a continuum. It's a forever. And Christian growth is a forever Christian growth. I'm a more committed Christian today than I was when I was 30. Not because I didn't want to be then. It's just that I didn't understand near as much as I understand now. And I only understand a tiny bit.
Yeah.
Right? And we won't understand fully until we're with Christ in heaven. But I think that's the point. And so if your church view is this salvation is a one-time miraculous thing, and you go from bad to good, you're going to foster this environment of, I got to be good. I got to act good. I got to act better than I am.
Right.
Or I'm going to negate my salvation. And I think,
and it's easy to project that on other people too.
Yeah.
When we're treating ourselves that way, then we treat other people that way, and they feel the disconnect.
Then the flip side of that is, well, we're all rotten, so let's just be rotten. It's like, hey, yeah, we're all sinners, so yeah, you're a sinner. So
it says things about that too.
It's Saturday night, go sin and come to church on Sunday. It's okay, everybody's a sinner. You just go,
getting back to being the same
balance?
person.
Where's the balance? Right?
Yeah.
The balance is, I am a sinner saved by grace, trying to grow in my relationship with God. It's never a straight line. It's always curvy. Hopefully it's more closer over time, not further away. But I don't know if that helps or not.
Yeah, no, I appreciate the comments. And the other thing, just to maybe throw one more thought on there, one of the things that we had Dr. Ron on from the Reardon Clinic, he talks a lot about how, one of the things he said that really stuck with me is how our bodies are addicted to healthy. So once we experience what healthy is, our bodies want more of that. And I think that applies to our spiritual life too.
Yeah.
Once we experience that health side, then we want more of it, and that's encouraging to me.
Yeah, it is. It's I've been reading A.W. Tozer's book. I think it's called The Knowledge of the Holy or something like that. Just an amazing writer, great writer, and deep thoughts. And it takes me about a month to get through a 6-page chapter because I have to read it, think about it, and reread it, and think about it. But one of the things he said in there is he was talking about so the book is a series of chapters about God, right? So I've been on this quest of trying to know God better. But he says, how can the finite, which is what we are, ever understand the infinite? And so I had this thought, like, I really want to understand God. Well, okay, I can know more about him, but I can't understand him. I can never understand him. How can you understand a being who has always been, who does not change, sees, knows us, knows everything about us, knows what we did, knows what we think, knows what we will do, sees it all the time, and yet loves us. I mean, knows that you and I are rebellious against him. We want to be the God of our own lives. And yet he loves us. Scripture says he's called us by name. We're his. So it's an amazing thing to contemplate. But the point I'm making is when you kind of get your focus on that he really is the God of the universe, then a lot of things kind of pale and become less important for you to really think about. I mean, it's like, and I can tell you many times in my life, this thought has gone through my head. Do you believe God or don't you? Do you believe he is or don't you? Took our son to college. I don't think he'd be upset if I told you this, but, he wasn't where he and his mom and I thought he should be spiritually. And we left him at school and drove home, and get about halfway home, and Rhonda's been upset all the way home. I just remember saying, Rhonda, either God is God or he isn't. Either God loves him more than we do, or he doesn't. And if he doesn't, it doesn't matter. But he does. And he will. We can trust God. We can trust our son with God.
Amen.
And you know what? It turned out not without some worries. And then he, nutcase, went over and spent some time in Iraq in the army. Got shot at every day. And it's like, but we trusted God through that. And so you go, he's either God or he's not.
Mm-hmm.
And I choose to trust him. And that tends to align the rest of life a little bit better.
Yeah.
Not perfect, but a little bit better.
Wow. Well, quite the conversation today.
Well, thanks for inviting me. I enjoyed it.
Absolutely. What a pleasure to have you on the podcast. Have you come visit our office, and So thank you so much for all that you're doing for the community, that you do for those around you, and leading by example with your priorities and helping us to get a little better keyed in for ourselves.
Well, thank you. I enjoyed being here.
All right. Well, let's go ahead and wrap it up. And thank you so much for coming on. This has been Real Wealth Podcast with Mike Proctor, sponsored by Leading Edge Financial Planning, with Mr. Turner, former CEO of Spirit AeroSystems.